Hello, okay, so today we're going to look at the Hamilton T1 ventilator. Just a few bits about it. It's a turbine driven ventilator, so it's in training ambient air and delivering it to the patient. On this side of the vent there is where your O2 hose is going to plug in for your high pressure oxygen. There's also a low pressure connector, and here's my AC plug. So the AC plug will give, from fully charged, will give 9 hours of battery. There are 2 batteries on board, both 4.5 hours each, so 9 hours from a full charge. So for that reason we would recommend that the ventilator is left plugged in when it's not being used. So now I'm going to switch it on, and when I do switch it on, what the ventilator does is it runs through an internal self-diagnostic. So you'll see a small bit of text come here saying self-test. So it's testing all its internal components, its circuit boards, the turbine, the alarm, all those kind of things. So for that reason we would recommend that you leave the ventilator turned off when it's not in use. So whoever comes to it has to turn it on. It's running through the self-test, so you know the ventilator is good to go once it switches on. So when it's not in use, turned off and plugged in. So the ventilator now has switched itself on. So I'll just run through some of the buttons, and then what we're going to do is we're going to put on a circuit. And I'll just show you the part of the ventilator we're going to put the circuit on. So we've got our expiratory port here, picture a guide there pointing out. We've got our inspiratory port, picture a guide there pointing in. And then we've got our blue and our white ports where the flow sensor is going to plug in. And we've got a yellow port, and that is for an internal pneumatic nebulizer. You can plug the neb tubing onto that, and the vent will sequence the neb. So here then is my circuit. And as you can see, I have my expiratory valve and flow sensor tubing on this end of the circuit, and on this end of the circuit then I have my blue flow sensor with my sizing adapter that we're going to use to calibrate the flow sensor. So I'm going to plug on the circuit. I always take off my expiratory valve when I'm plugging it on. Much easier to plug on. It's got a removable cover to protect the membrane, and on this side of the vent is where we're going to plug it in. So the expiratory valve plugs in to the expiratory port all the way anti-clockwise to lock it in fully, and then it gets a 1/10 turn clockwise to secure it. It's one of the things to check, that if you've got a big leak, just make sure that someone has not just put that in like that, that they've actually turned it around and locked it. Then the circuit itself plugs onto the ventilator just like this, pushes on like so, and then my flow sensor tubing is colour coded blue and clear. You need to peel the sensor tubing apart to give it some space, and then it plugs blue on blue, clear on white, and the circuit now is ready to test. So if you look here on the bottom left hand corner of the screen, we have our pre-op check button, and it's here that I'm going to test the circuit for tightness and also to make sure that the flow sensor is working. The circuit has a dust cover on, which I'm going to take off to get it ready for the testing. So the first one I'm going to do is tightness. So I hit the tightness button here. It tells me to disconnect the patient, and then it prompts me to tighten the patient's system. So I either occlude the circuit with a gloved hand, or I can put the dust cover back into the circuit, and you hear the ventilator looking for a leak anywhere along. And that's it. So that's our tightness test complete. And then we get a green tick here, and the date and the time. The next one I'm going to do is the flow sensor. So each circuit comes with a sizing adapter that allows me to turn the flow sensor for calibration. So the ventilator is going to prompt me to turn the flow sensor, and I put in my sizing adapter on top, and then I can turn the sensor around for calibration in this direction, and then I'm going to turn it back again for calibration in the opposite direction. So I'm going to show you how that looks on the ventilator. So I hit flow sensor, it tells me to disconnect the patient. The first thing it prompts me to do is to turn the flow sensor. I only have 15 seconds from each prompt, or else it will fail and make me start again. So if I don't do this manoeuvre within 15 seconds, it will fail. So I turn it around, then it says manoeuvre in progress. So the ventilator is going to generate 4 different levels of flow. It knows how much flow it's generating, so it knows what the sensor should read. And then halfway through it's going to ask me to turn the sensor back around again, and it's going to do the same manoeuvre in the opposite direction. Very important to watch the prompts. So I'm prompted now to turn the flow sensor again, and if I don't do this turn within the 15 seconds from the prompt, it'll fail and make me start again. So very important to pay attention to the prompts on the screen to do the different maneuvers. So if it does fail the flow sensor calibration, we'd say to do it again, paying attention to the prompts on the screen. If the flow sensor calibration fails a second time or a third time, you may need a new flow sensor, but we've never come across them failing out of the packet, ever. And then we have our green tick and the date and the time. The third one then is the O2 cell calibration. You don't need to do it every time, you only need to do it when you're prompted by the ventilator, and you'll be prompted with a red X and a yellow alarm text up on top to say O2 cell calibration needed. And if you are prompted, all you do is you press the O2 cell button. It'll calibrate the O2 cell in the background. You don't need to do anything else. You could be doing other preparation at this point. This takes 2 minutes. So I'm going to X out of that and we'll have a look at the home screen. So we've got our modes button up top, so I'm going to run through all the different modes that are on the ventilator now in a minute. And then we've got our last patient button, which will start the ventilator on whatever settings it finished on the last time it was running. We have our adult pediatric software, and the adult pediatric software with this adult pediatric circuit will do patients from 3 kilograms up to full adult, 3 kilograms being average birth weight. There's also neonatal software, and that will do patients from 200 grams up to up to 30 kilos. The neonatal software takes a different expiratory valve and a different circuit, and as you can see, the ventilator will not let me go forward with the wrong circuit for the wrong software. So there are 3 shortcuts on the front. So if there's 3 modes that you use a lot, you can put them on the front screen. And then again, the ventilator is looking for male or female, and then it's looking for a patient height. Every height has an ideal body weight. So if we'll put in my own height here, so you can see my ideal body weight is 66 kilos. So then we know that my minute volume is 6.6 litres a minute of minute volume. So that's, by putting in the height, the ventilator sets up the ventilator for defaults for delivered tidal volume, and also for defaults for the alarms, the high and low limits on the alarms. Then we've got my start ventilator button. So here let's look at the modes. We have 2 volume control modes up on top. We have controlled mechanical ventilation, which is our basic volume guarantee. So we're setting a tidal volume over PEEP with our FaO2 rate, I time and a flow trigger. There's no pressure support in the mode, so it won't support any patient triggered breaths, and there's a possibility of stacking depending on where the patient triggers in the cycle. SAMV, synchronized intermittent mandatory ventilation. So there's all the same settings as CMV, but we do have pressure support for any breaths that the patient triggers themselves, so the ventilator will synchronize with patient activity. PCV is pressure control ventilation, and these are labelled pressure controlled, these 5 modes underneath. And PCV is pressure control, so we're setting our inspiration pressure and our PEEP. We've got a rate and a night time and a trigger. Again, there's no support in the mode for any patient triggered breaths. Pressure SIMV, we have all the same settings: inspiration pressure, PEEP, FaO2 rate and I time. Again, there is support, so it will synchronize with patient activity. There's something called P-Sync, so it's syncing the pressure support to what the inspiration pressure is set at. If I want to have different support, just untick P-Sync and it'll activate pressure support if you want to have different support to the inspiration pressure. That is pressure SIMV. SPONT is for spontaneously breathing patients. So here you're just setting your support and your PEEP. All patient breaths are triggered. Duo PAP, or dual positive airway pressure. Again, we're looking pressure high, time to high, and so it's a form of BiPAP. And then APRV, or airway pressure relief ventilation. We're setting our time to high and pressure high over our time to low and pressure low. So if you want to do inverse ratio ventilation, APRV, or if you're someone in real distress, APRV is there for that. ASV is specific to Hamilton, so I'm going to run the vent on ASV just to show you how that works. And then underneath we've got our non-invasive modes. NIV, which is our masked CPAP, we're just setting our support on our PEEP. And then NIV ST, ST stands for sequenced and timed, so we're setting our inspiration pressure on our PEEP. We also have rate and an I time, so that is a bi-level non-invasive. And then we've got our high flow where we're setting our FaO2 and our flow. Hamilton will do 80 litres a minute of flow for high flow. ASV is specific to Hamilton, so I'm going to run the ventilator on ASV so we can have a look at that. It's easier to explain. Very important as well, the recommendation for turbine driven ventilators is that you would filter the air that's been generated by the ventilator before it's delivered to the patient. So a HME filter here will suffice, and also here we're filtering going to the patient, but also more importantly we're filtering air coming from the patient. Very important if you have an infectious patient. So I'm going to use my smart lung here, and I'm going to start the ventilator. So I put in my height. I'm going to dial down my FiO2 to 21%. So I put in my height, press start, and here with ASV, what the ventilator is doing now is testing the lung that I've just put it on. The vertical axis is tidal volume, the horizontal axis is frequency. So what the vent's going to do is it knows my target minute volume is 6.6 litres a minute, and it's going to use tidal volume and frequency to achieve the target minute volume based on the mechanics of this particular lung. The curve on the graph is all of the combinations of frequency and tidal volume that will achieve the minute volume. The red box is all the safe combinations, and the green dot is the ideal combination of frequency and tidal volume that will achieve the target minute volume. The red cross is what's happening, or the yellow cross is what's happening with the patient in real time. So, you can see I've done nothing, just put in the height, press start, and the ventilator is starting to ventilate this lung. Now, I'm going to show you what ASV, adaptive support ventilation, I'm going to show you the adaptive part of ASV. So I'm going to start to trigger some breaths to simulate some spontaneous breathing. And a triggered breath is denoted by the pink triangle on the under the flow waveform. I'm going to do some spontaneous activity. Sorry about that. And my alarm silence. So just to do some spontaneous activity. So you see the ventilator is supporting those spontaneous breaths. And now I'm going to stop. And what the ventilator is doing now is pausing, waiting to see if I trigger any more breaths. And when it realises, when the apnea runs on and it realises I'm not going to trigger anymore, it delivers me a breath. And then it's going to pause again. And when it realises I'm not going to trigger anymore, it's going to deliver me a breath. And then the pause is going to get shorter and shorter until it's back into full mandatory ventilation. So ASV will go all the way to being a CPAP or pressure support mode with fully patient triggered breaths, all the way back into a full mandatory mode if the patient starts to struggle. So it's always looking to encourage spontaneous breathing, so we'll have shorter ventilation times and we can wean quicker, or if the patient's really struggling, it'll just go back into full mandatory ventilation. The control on ASV then is we're controlling a percentage of the target minute volume. So you can see my target minute volume here is 6.6 litres per minute, and we're aiming for 100% of the 6.6 litres a minute. So if we see a rise, for example, of CO2 in our patient, normally we'd increase our rate or maybe our tidal volume a little bit, and the effect that would have overall is our minute volume would rise. So if I turn up my rate by 1, minute volume is my rate over my rate times tidal volume. So if I turn my rate up 1, my minute volume automatically goes up. So here with ASV, we're controlling the minute volume. So rather than turning the rate up to turn up the minute volume, we just turn up the minute volume itself. So Hamilton recommend 10% increases. So I see rise in CO2, and I want to scrub it out. I'm going to go from 100% to 110%. My target went from 6.6 litres a minute to 7.3 litres a minute, and my frequency went from 12 to 13. So rather than using frequency or pressure or tidal volume to increase or decrease the minute volume, we just increase or decrease the minute volume itself. So that is ASV. So if I want to switch out of ASV mode, I'm going to pick pressure, SIMV, confirm. If I'm happy with those settings, confirm, and you can see the vent has just switched in to pressure SIMV. So the mode we're on the top right, we've got our main controls underneath. Controls brings me back into the control screen. Alarms is where I can manually adjust any of the alarms if I know why something is alarming. There is a Pmax default, all Hamilton modes default to a Pmax of 40 centimetres of water. There is a restriction 10 centimetres of water below the Pmax. So if you have airway pressures rising up to the 30s, the vent will start to restrict the breaths or the pressures. If you want to have airway pressures up into the 30s, all you do is you dial up your Pmax. So if I dial my Pmax up to 45, my restriction lifts to 35. If I dial it up to 48, my restriction lifts to 38, and so on. So that is the Pmax with the restriction. It's the only alarm that has a restriction associated. So that is alarms. System then is all the information on the vent. I've got how much O2 I'm using here. I've also got a percentage charge on the batteries. Now I've got a visual indicator here, but a percentage charge, so I know exactly how much battery I have left. Events is everything that we've done since we turned on the ventilator, every adjustment that we've made. And tools, you can ignore tools, is for switching from high pressure mode to low pressure mode. And then we've got our main monitor parameters here on the side. And if I go into monitoring, then it gives me all the parameters you'd expect to see. My mils per kilo, my ratio, my PEEP. Number 2, my I&E flows, how much spont is in the patient is doing, how much leak is in the circuit. And number 3 is all the lung mechanics. So I've got my static compliance, I've got my expiratory time constant, resistance, any intrinsic PEEP, and so on. If I touch the flow waveform anywhere, I get another sub-menu where I can trend any of those parameters up to 3 days. I can put on various different pressure, volume, or flow loops. I can put on different types of graphics, event status, and for example, to see if the patient is suitable for weaning. But what we're used to, I suppose, is pressure and flow waveforms. The hard keys then, I've got a day and a night button for dimming and brightening the screen. I've got a screen lock here, so when I press the screen lock, it locks the screen so I can't do anything on the screen. I've got a mandatory breath, so when I press the breath, it delivers the breath to peak and holds it there for as long as I hold the button. I've got my O2 flush, so when I press it, it delivers me, gives me 100% oxygen for 2 minutes, and then when I disconnect from the lung, it gives me a minute unalarmed to do what it assumes is a suctioning maneuver, and then when I reconnect, it'll automatically start to ventilate again, and it gives me 100% for 2 minutes for reoxygenation. So that's my O2 flush. My nebulizer button here is for the pneumatic nebulizer, which is on the side of the ventilator here. That turns that one on. If you're using your AeroNeb, Aerogen have a specific lead that has a USB cable attached to it, and that is where the AeroNeb would get its power from, on the USB port on that side of the ventilator. So my data transfer button is for the engineers putting on and off software. It's for taking screenshots if you have a USB flash drive plugged into the USB port, and there's my alarm silence. So to return the ventilator to the standby mode, if I press the power button one time, I can activate standby and it brings me back into my standby screen. It's defaulting to last patient, so I can start again on whatever settings the ventilator has just finished on. And if I have a new patient, I pick my software and then I can put in my patient height and get going again. If I do want to turn off the ventilator, I basically press and hold the power button until the screen goes blank. So on Hamilton's website, which is hamilton-medical.com, they have simulators of all of their ventilators, and also if you go into the iOS App Store or the Play Store, there are simulators for various different ventilators, the C6 and so on. But on their main website, hamilton-medical.com, simulators for the vents. There's also modules and different videos and courses that you can do for ventilation in general. So if you go on there, you just need to give them your email address, and they can set you up with an account.